All right. Hello, welcome to the Schoolyard Maintenance Virtual Workshop brought to you by Land and Lawn Forum, Reflo, and the North Central IPM Center. So the agenda for today, it's going to be a quick introduction from me and people from Reflo, Justin and Jasmine, and then the presentation by Ryan Anderson, and then we're going to have a question and answer session. So the Lawn and Land Forum Working Group, the mission is to curb excessive pesticide use in the home, lawn, and garden sector on sports and recreation fields and in the management of invasive plant species across all urban environments. And then the School IPM Working Group, which is also related, schoolyard maintenance. The mission is to improve adoption of IPM practices in schools, which achieve improvements to environmental safety, health standards, and educational outcomes in the North Central region schools. And also part of that working group is Pest Defense for Healthy Schools, which is an online school health training course for K through 12 employees. And the funding for these two working groups comes from the North Central IPM Center. And now we're going to hear a short introduction from, was it Jasmine?
I'll do
Justin?
the yep. So yeah, my name is Justin Haggerty. I'm the executive director of the nonprofit Reflo. I'm also an environmental engineer, and we worked. Well, Reflo is a nonprofit. We work on schoolyard redevelopment projects in the Milwaukee area, and we predominantly work with Milwaukee Public Schools. Milwaukee Public Schools is the largest public school district in the state of Wisconsin, with about 150 schools. And to date, we have removed asphalt and redeveloped schoolyards at 31 Milwaukee Public Schools. And there are another 10 in the pipeline. And each year we support 5 schoolyard redevelopment projects each summer. And so as a part of that process, with 31 projects built, we've learned that maintenance of turf in particular is an ongoing challenge. Our urban public schools are very densely, populated in neighborhoods that get used after school hours. There's a lot of foot traffic on our turf. And so we worked with Midwest Grows Green very closely on trying to assess how to overcome some of the challenges that we've seen with implementing turf on schoolyards, especially in the urban context, and how to implement some best management practices going forward as well.
All right. Thanks, Justin. Nikki, do you want me to go ahead and start the presentation?
Yeah, go ahead and start.
All right. I'm going to share my screen for everybody. 1 second. Everybody can see my screen, right? Okay. Well, thank you. Thanks, Justin. Thank you, Nikki, for having this session, the Schoolyard Maintenance Virtual Workshop. My name is Ryan Anderson. I have worked with Midwest Grows Green from 2015 up until August of 2024, so August of this year. So I have a lot of experience with Midwest Grows Green and sustainable landscaping. And for this presentation, I'm going to draw on that experience specifically with working with Reflo, as well as a couple other schoolyards in the greater Chicago, greater Milwaukee area, and across the Midwest. So the objectives for this presentation, first and foremost, we want to provide schoolyard managers with the tools needed to manage their vegetation, but also manage their vegetation with limited synthetic pesticides and fertilizers. And so to do that, I'm going to start with an introduction of what Midwest Grows Green is, its mission, its objectives, and its approach. And then I'm going to talk about the Midwest Grows Green natural lawn care approach and how it leverages the soil microbiome to grow healthy schoolyards. Third, I'm going to look at a pesticide-free schoolyard management schedule that Nikki sent this morning to everybody. and that we developed or partnered with Reflo in developing that schedule. And I'll wrap everything up with 2 case studies of successful implementation of that management schedule for schoolyards. So one schoolyard in Chicago, one in Milwaukee. So just a review of what Midwest Grows Green is. It is an initiative of the nonprofit, the IPM Institute of North America. And its mission is to educate and empower citizens to take sustainable landscaping action that reduces harmful runoff into our waterways, protects the health of our most vulnerable citizens, and reduces negative impacts of pesticides on non-target species such as pollinators. It is an initiative under the IPM Institute, so it uses the integrated pest management approach, and the IPM Institute defines integrated pest management, or IPM for short, as a sustainable, science-based decision-making process that combines biological, cultural, physical, and chemical tools to identify, manage, and reduce risks from pests and pest management tools and strategies in a way that minimizes overall economic, health, and environmental risks. So in a nutshell, IPM is using all the tools in our toolbox to control for a pest or weed. Today, we're talking mostly about lawn care, and there are a lot of management practices available to us before we need to resort to synthetic pesticides or synthetic fertilizers. First, I'm going to stress cultural management, anything that goes into growing a healthy, dense, and deeply rooted turf grass system that's going to outcompete weeds and pests for air, water, and sunlight. So that's practices like mowing high, watering properly, aerating compacted soil, overseeing bare soil areas, and adding organic matter dense materials such as leaf mulch, grass clippings, and compost. Next, I'll touch on a couple of biological and mechanical controls. Biological could be using beneficial nematodes to kill for grubs, and mechanical could be mowing off the tops of dandelions' heads before they reproduce. And then finally, IPM does allow for the use of pesticides, but only after we've exhausted all these other measures. And if we're going to use a pesticide, we want to make sure we use the least amount of the least harmful product. So Midwest Grows Green's vision is to make all public and private parks, playing fields, and outdoor landscapes in the Midwest organic by the year 2030. Midwest Grows Green has consulted on more than 50 green spaces to go pesticide free. And over the past 4 years, there's been a recent stress on schoolyards and restoring these schoolyards because the approach that we apply matches very well to the needs of the schoolyards. So these are 2 before and after photos of the case studies that I'm going to present later on to this afternoon. The one on the left is Ray Elementary School in Chicago. The one on the right will be La Escuela Fratney in Milwaukee. And for both of these schoolyards, we apply natural lawn care processes to restore the vegetation on these sites. And I'll discuss how we apply those natural lawn care concepts throughout. But the primary way that we apply natural lawn care is by leveraging what we call the soil microbiome. So that handful of soil contains more than 200 billion bacteria, 20 million protozoa, and 100,000 nematodes. These organisms offer unlimited potential for healthy grass, healthy vegetation. To put in perspective the diversity in our soil, scientists have only identified about 20% of the soil microbes in New York City's Central Park. And of that 20, they know that they provide valuable ecosystem services such as breaking down organic matter, balancing soil pH, inhibiting plant pathogens, and cycling nutrients. Midwest Grows Green leads the Lawn and Land Forum, and this is one of the sessions. And through the Lawn and Land Forum, we've developed a website called lawnandland.org that talks about our approaches to natural lawn care, the soil microbiome, as well as natural area management. And we have a page completely devoted to soil health. And at the start of that page, that at the start of that page, it discusses the soil microbiome and the 6 functional microbiological groups that turfgrass scientists, soil scientists are often concerned about the most. First, we have aerobic bacteria such as bacilli that are going to produce compounds that inhibit plant pathogens and promote plant growth. So soils that are deficient in aerobic bacteria tend to increase the disease risk for turfgrass. On the flip side, we have anaerobic bacteria that excel in limited oxygen and compacted soil conditions. A healthy soil will often have an aerobic to anaerobic bacteria ratio above 10:1. Third, we have fungi of saprophytic as well as mycorrhizal fungi that decompose organic matter, cycle nutrients, and stabilize soil. And finally, we have actinomycete bacteria. Fourth, we have actinomycete bacteria, which break down hard to decompose compounds such as chitin found in insects and cellulose found in plants. And then finally, we have a set of 2 nitrogen fixing bacteria, symbiotic, which tends to live in the root layer or rhizosphere of plants, and pseudomonads, which are more free-living nitrogen fixing bacteria. Both of these bacteria are going to fix nitrogen gas into plant accessible nitrogen, such as ammonium. So they offer fertilizer for our grass and other vegetation. Midwest Grows Green wants to implement strategies that benefit these 6 microbiological groups, and those practices include, first and foremost, healthy growing plants. I mentioned already the rhizosphere, or that root layer. A lot of plants and their roots are going to release what we call exudates, which include carbohydrates, sugars, amino acids, and proteins. And so those exudates are going to feed the microbiological life so that they can perform all these ecosystem services that I just covered. We also want a balanced pH for our soil, adequate soil moisture with quality water. And then we want to really stress organic matter dense materials like leaf mulch, grass clippings, and compost. We want to fertilize organically. And finally, we want to ensure that air, water, and nutrients can get in and out of that soil profile by doing things like aerating at least once per year, as well as adding some compost to our soils. In terms of threats to the microbiome, I'm only going to address 2 today. First is pesticides, second is synthetic fertilizers. For pesticides, there are 2 ways that pesticides can harm or alter the soil microbiome. The first is, I have discussed multiple times, that rhizosphere and how that provides an environment and forage for these microbes. So if you're using an herbicide to kill a plant, that is going to take away habitat and forage for our microbiology. Second reason is there have been studies from universities and others that have seen changes or alterations in populations of these microbes after pesticide applications. Now, when I say changes, that means the population could go up, the population could go down, but it has definitely caused a significant alteration in the population of these microbes. And we have some links to those studies on lawnandland.org. For synthetic fertilizers, a lot of synthetic fertilizers tend to be petroleum-based, salt-based, or even mineral-based, that if you over-apply these fertilizers, they could actually alter the environment and some of the characteristics of the soil. Looking specifically at the pH of that soil, could alter that pH and create an environment that is less hospitable to these microbes that I've just discussed. So for natural lawn care, which is the approach that Midwest Grows Green uses, that approach is trying to avoid these threats to the microbiome while leveraging all the potential benefits to the soil microbiome. So Midwest Grows Green defines natural lawn care as a systemic approach that refrains from using synthetic chemicals and focuses on building healthy soil, deep roots, and strong shoots to support healthy, resilient turf grass. Whenever I talk about the differences between natural lawn care and conventional lawn care, I always say that natural lawn care is a process-based approach. We are focused on the processes that go into building healthy soil, deep roots, and strong shoots. That's things like aerating compacted soil, overseeing bare soil, mowing high, proper irrigation, and so on. That is in stark contrast to conventional lawn care that is more product-based. You have heard these 4-step, these 5-step programs. Apply this pesticide, apply this fertilizer at this time of the year, and you're going to get that green weed-free lawn that is so desirable in the United States. Well, that really takes out the biology of the microbiome that we're trying to manage and nurture. And meanwhile, natural lawn care brings that biology back into the approach. And so going with this process-based versus product-based, I like to make another analogy that we should be caring for our soil, for our plants, much like we should be caring for our own human bodies, because they are both biological organisms. And there are two things that we can control the most for our bodies: our diet and our exercise. And those are the two things that we can control the most for our grass and for our soil as well. For the diet, it's about understanding the needs of our grass and our soil and feeding our soil and grass with organic matter dense materials. And then for exercise, it's about maintaining that dense, deeply rooted turf grass system that I've discussed multiple times already. So starting off with a diet and our analogy to our human bodies, if we're going to go on a diet for ourselves, often we need to assess the initial state, because how can we get to our desirable state without knowing where we're starting from? And so we can do a couple things for our bodies. We can weigh ourselves and say we need to cut 10 to 20 pounds from there. We can look at our diet and exercise over the past month and make adjustments. Or we could go to a doctor or nutritionist and let them tell us how we should approach this diet. We can do all these things for our soil too. It's called getting a soil test. Midwest Grows Green recommends getting a soil test once every 3 years. If we're dealing with athletic fields or highly trafficked turf grass fields, we actually recommend more frequently, maybe once every year, because some of these nutrients can fluctuate a little bit more. Soil tests will tell you about the pH, the nutrient levels, the macronutrients like nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, but also some of these micronutrients like calcium, magnesium, and iron. It'll look at the organic matter content, which I will go into in just a little bit. That's a big part to the soil. It'll tell you the soil texture as well. Is it a high clay soil, high sand soil, or something in between? And after it provides you with these data points, the soil test provider will often offer a set of recommendations for how to treat your soil. And when you get those recommendations, it's important to know that there's 16 essential nutrients for healthy plant and soil life. Synthetic fertilizers tend to focus most on the big three: nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, which are absolutely important. But we often see that organic fertilizers focus on more of these 16 nutrients. And then they release these nutrients over an extended period of time so that they stay in our soil longer. Also, these nutrients, to break down organic fertilizers, you need the soil microbiological life, because the microbiological life is eating or breaking down these organic fertilizers, and they're recycling some of those nutrients to the plant roots, as well as doing all the other benefits that I mentioned earlier on in my presentation. Lawnandland.org has a graphic of some of the more popular organic fertilizer types like seaweed, corn glue, and blood meal. It covers what nutrients each of these types will provide to your soil and to your plants, how and when to apply those organic fertilizers. And then it also has a little section for the risk of burning your turf. Now, this tends to be more of an issue for synthetic fertilizers, but some of these organic fertilizers do release their nutrients quite rapidly relative to others. So you do need to have a little bit of concern of over applying these organic fertilizers. Not as much as synthetic. Sorry. Oh, okay. Not as much as synthetic, but there is a risk for some of these organic fertilizers. I do want to do I do want to say that organic fertilizers, synthetic fertilizers, they're very good on the nutrient capacity. And nutrients are absolutely important for all life, but there's also structure that we're concerned for our soil. And Midwest Grows Green wants a sponge-like soil structure for all of our projects. I say a sponge because if you wet a sponge, it's going to hold on to that water. But if you squeeze it, it's going to let that water go. That's what we want with our soil. We want our soil to hold on to that air, that water, that nutrients, but we don't want to hold on so tightly that is preventing turfgrass roots and vegetation roots from accessing those air, the water, the nutrients. And the best way to get a sponge-like soil structure is by adding organic matter dense materials. Organic matter tends to be very porous, so that creates that increases water holding capacity, but it also doesn't hold on to these nutrients, the air, the water too tightly. You can get organic matter through leaf mulch, grass clippings, and compost. One of the resources that Nikki sent was our Using Compost fact sheet that we created with the Illinois Food Scrap and Composting Coalition. That covers how to source and even make biologically, chemically, and physically mature compost. This is a graphic on lawnandland.org that also shares what biologically, chemically, and physically mature compost looks like. For biological maturity, of course, we want high biological activity, especially in those 6 functional microbiological groups. There is something called the maturity index that you can get a soil test for, and we want it to be above 50% on that maturity index. We want to avoid invasive species. Something in the Midwest that has been popping up has been these invasive jumping worms. So we want to avoid contamination from jumping worms out in the Midwest with our compost. For chemical maturity, we want a persistence of calcium and potassium, low concentration of soluble salts, pH between 6.5 and 8.5, and a calcium to nitrogen ratio that is at or below 30:1. And then finally, for physical maturity, we want moisture content to be between 30 to 60%, a fine texture for the compost at or below an 1/8 inch. And when you pick it up, you want that earthy smell, dark brown to black color. And finally, minimal contamination in terms of stones and glass. The Using Compost fact sheet also covers how to handle this compost for turf grass and for your lawns. If you have an established lawn, the recommendation is about a 1/4 inch of compost top dressing, then run that aerator over the compost and incorporate it into the lawn. And for Midwest Grows Green, the best time to do any applications, especially in the Midwest here, in the colder temperatures, is in the fall. In the fall for our cool season or cold season grasses, that is when our grasses are going to devote its energy towards root growth. And roots contain those hormones and those nutrients. So if you have a deep enough root system for our turf grass, next spring or next growing season, the grass is going to green up real quick, and you might not even need any fertilizer to start that green up. But if you don't have that deep root system, you are going to need more applications of fertilizers, very likely, depending if you get a lot of traffic for that lawn. So always try to do this compost applications in the fall, but you can also do it in the spring, late spring too. All right, so that covers the lawn care diet of adding organic matter dense materials like compost, leaf mulch, and grass clippings, as well as fertilizing organically and getting that soil test at least once every 3 years. Every diet is best accommodated with fitness. When I talk about exercise for our lawns, I always like to share this Purdue University Read Your Weeds table. On the left column are popular weeds found in the Midwest: clover, crabgrass, and dandelions. And on the top row are their favorable conditions: compacted soil, mowing height too low, low pH, excessive watering, and poor drainage. And what Midwest Grows Green says about this is that if you culturally maintain a healthy, dense, and deeply rooted turf grass system, you're going to eliminate all these favorable conditions. So let me take you through an example. Look at annual bluegrass. Its 3 favorable conditions are compacted soil, mowing height too low, and excessive watering. All can be maintained or managed or eliminated with cultural practices. Compacted soil, I already talked about compost. Compost increases porosity and it can reduce compaction. And I talked about how you can incorporate that compost with an aeration. Core aeration, taking these holes 3 to 6 inches deep and leaving them on the lawn, is a good mechanical way to reduce soil compaction. And we recommend aerating at least once every year in the fall. If you're getting a lot of foot traffic, you can benefit from 2 to 3 aerations per year. Mowing height too low. Midwest Grows Green recommends mowing no lower than 3 inches, no lower than 2.5 inches for athletic fields, no lower than 3 inches for regular fields. And if you can bump it up to 4 inches, that would be fantastic. Now, mowing high helps for 2 reasons. First, you're going to have a tall canopy, a tall grass canopy, and that's going to shade out the soil layer, and that soil layer contains weed seeds. So those weed seeds cannot access sunlight, they will not germinate. The second reason why mowing high helps is because there's something in turf grass management called the third rule, which says you don't want to take off 1/3 of the grass's blade or shoot per mowing event, because that could stress out the grass plant and tell the grass plant to grow its shoots as opposed to its roots, which is once again the most important part of the grass plant. So if you are mowing at 2 inches, you only have 1 inch of growth before you need to adhere to that third rule. Now, if you're mowing at 4 inches, you have 2 inches of growth before you need to adhere to that third rule. And so you can decrease the frequency of mowing if you are mowing at a very high rate. Third, excessive watering. Midwest Grows Green recommends watering no more than 1 inch per week, and that should be one thorough watering, not spread out over the week, once again, so that we can get that deep root system. Midwest Grows Green partnered with Reflo, as well as a couple other our lawn and landform working group, to develop this pesticide-free schoolyard management schedule that tries to simplify the natural lawn care calendar that I just went through for the diet as well as the exercise schedule. I'm not going to go through this whole calendar with everybody today because I don't have enough time, but I did want to get through some of the essentials that we recommend for almost every schoolyard that Midwest Grows Green has worked with. First, the mowing height. I want to stress again, we want to mow our schoolyards at least once per week between the 2.5 and 4.5 inches. 2.5 if it's an athletic field, but try to get up all the way to 4 inches if it's not an athletic field. Second, for aeration, at least once per year, preferably 2 times. Late spring, and early fall, so late spring after the dandelions have bloomed and gone back, have gone dormant. And then early fall would be right around now or earlier in the month or late August. And I'm going to talk about this in one of the case studies. Sometimes aeration is actually not a practical decision. So do consider that. And that case is for La Escuela Fraternity, where we didn't have a deep enough soil profile for that aeration. So I'll talk about that in just a little bit. But if you do have a deep enough soil profile, definitely look into that aeration. And try to accommodate that aeration with an overseed. Aeration is a great way to ensure proper seed to soil contact, and an overseed should happen right about now. So if you are managing your schoolyards, our recommendation is late August as well as in September. So in the next 2 weeks, if you have grass seed, you should definitely be putting that down for your schoolyard so that you can have a dense system before the grass goes dormant for the winter. And you can accommodate that overseeding with a compost if you're able to source a high quality compost in your region. So if this still seems a little bit complex and complicated, the fortunate thing is there are resources to help you implement this schoolyard management schedule, starting with Midwest Grows Green's Technical Assistance Program. That is the program that has been working with Reflo over these past 3 years or so on their schoolyard restorations. It's also helped park districts with management of their turf grass and other green spaces. So for all types of uses. I'm going to go through briefly what the Technical Assistance Program is. If you want to look further into it, the website or the web page can be found at bit.ly/MGG in caps assistance and on caps. TAP, or the Technical Assistance Program, has 3 phases. And the first phase I'm not going to cover today. I don't have time, but it's basically an exercise that Midwest Grows Green does with a school district or park district to shift their time and resources to the management that is necessary to transition their highest trafficked green spaces away from synthetic pesticides and fertilizers. So it's called a sustainable landscaping audit. But it leads into the second phase, which I'm going to focus the most on, which is a 3-year sustainable landscape management plan. During this plan, Midwest Grows Green brings a soil scientist, a turf scientist, or a green space expert to 1 or 2 green spaces. They take soil tests, they do site assessments, and then they develop a sustainable landscape management plan that if all the recommendations from that plan are implemented, that park, that green space should be able to transition away from synthetic pesticides and fertilizers and restore whatever vegetation they're trying to manage. Third phase is Midwest Grows Green helping the park district, the school district, the municipality implement the recommendations that come from phase 1 and phase 2. So I have 2 case studies, as I mentioned at the beginning. The first is going to be Ray Elementary School, which is one of Midwest Grows Green's first schoolyards that it restored. It's in the south side of Chicago. And it's typical of what we see for schoolyards. You can see the image, a lot of bare soil, a lot of weeds, not a lot of turf grass on this schoolyard. This is what we typically start off with for schoolyards, and we come in and we come up with a plan to restore the grass on this site. So that is our main goal for this site. A little bit more background about this site. It's used, of course, by students for recess, but it's also used by the community for softball games, and they have an annual art fair in this community of Hyde Park that is attended by many people, and it's right around this green space. So that's how much traffic it gets, and it's just not managed to the point to handle all that traffic. So that is the kind of challenges that we are dealing with here at Ray Elementary School. Our soil scientist that worked on this schoolyard, as well as the Milwaukee schoolyards that I'm going to share a little bit later, his name is Vitas Papadinskis. He runs his own consulting firm, Save Our Soil LLC. Many of the images provided are either from him or myself for Ray Elementary School, as well as La Escuela Fratney. So he took an aerial of the schoolyard site, and each of the dots that you see indicates a soil testing site and a site where he did a soil compaction analysis. And I'll cover what we do for soil testing and soil compaction on the next slide. So that's each of the dots. And then the outlines are, there's two outline areas. The red area is a problematic area. With shallow soil, we already can see from the aerial, a lot of bare soil, a lot of brown in that aerial. The green is actually a high performing area for this schoolyard. It has a deep soil profile, and I'll show that in just a little bit. And that's where we want the red area to get to, just like that green area with that deep soil profile. So that's kind of comparing these two areas for soil testing. So Vitas is going to do for each of his schoolyards 3 different types of assessments. One is just a visual assessment of the schoolyard. What is the weed pressure? What is the turf grass quality? The second is the images on the left of this slide. It's a soil penetrometer analysis, and this is how we assess soil compaction for our green spaces. So the device, the penetrometer, it has a dial on the top, and that dial measures the resistance of the soil to the device's tip in pounds per square inch, or PSI. So if you see on the red section, that indicates PSI readings above 300, which is considered root limiting for turf grass. So he's going to drive this device down into the soil and measure what the reading is every inch that he goes into the soil. The device or equipment used on the right is just a soil probe, a soil tester. We take that soil core, we send it to a lab in Nebraska for the soil test assessment, but we also have some visual assessment of what we're dealing with for the soil just from that soil probe. So this is actually a soil core taken from Ray Elementary School, and you can see that it's the pores, there's not many pores, which is an indication of compaction. And there's kind of a grayish color at the top, which is an indication that we're dealing with high clay soil. So we're already understand from the visual assessment that we're dealing with high clay soil, which tends to be compacted if you're not doing things like aeration or compost top dressing. So our hypothesis is that we're dealing with heavy compaction that's kind of locking up these nutrients, this air, this water, and that's causing the grass to not perform as high as it should do. Here is the soil compaction analysis after the penetrometer readings. It confirmed our hypothesis. So the red areas were in that red outline center. Basically, when he pushed right away in those 4 areas, it read 300 PSI almost immediately. And he tried to push it even further down, about 3 inches, and it still had 300 PSI. So that's root limiting right away. He also did that high performing area, and as you can see, he went down as far as 17 inches and never hit 300 PSI. So that's giving us an indication that we are able to achieve a deep soil profile in this problematic area. We just need to do the appropriate practices to achieve that deep soil profile. Here's the soil test results for Ray Elementary School. By the way, this was taken in 2022. I forgot to say when we started this project. So the red boxes indicates a high disparity, either an excess or a deficiency. Yellow is a little bit of a concern in terms of a deficiency or an excess. And we come up with this determinations mainly by using the minimum levels for soil nutrition guide. It was created by Pace Turf and the Asian Turf Grass Center for turf grass. So it gives us minimum guidelines for pH, phosphorus, calcium, magnesium, and potassium. So if it's below these numbers, that is a high concern for us in terms of nutrients. What you can actually see from this soil test, and what we tend to see for schoolyards, is yes, it is a little bit low on phosphorus, but it's not that concerning. What is really concerning for us is that organic matter content and that high clay content of 44%. Those two indicators are telling us that really those are the indicators that are locking up the nutrients. And once we are able to unlock the nutrients, we expect everything else to kind of go up, for the exception of the soil pH, which we actually want it to go down in this scenario. So based on the soil test, based on the soil compaction, our interventions were the following. First, we know that there is a deep enough soil profile. We just need to break up that compaction. So we did a heavy aeration on the entire compacted site. That brought up the grass, that brought up the soil, that brought up the weeds. And then we had volunteers rake up those weeds and that grass, and that ended up being about 1,200 pounds of weeds in, I think it was just like a 4,000 square foot area. After that, we applied about a 1/2 inch of compost top dressing to increase the porosity. And then we overseeded that compost and irrigated that compost. This was in September of 2022. We actually had a very dry fall, which was unfortunate. And we didn't have at the time a really good irrigation plan because there wasn't any great irrigation provider. So the grass kind of struggled, but the one good thing is none of the weeds returned that we extracted. So we kind of had a blank slate when we did our second intervention in the second year of June 11th, 2023, where we did about a 1/4 inch of compost top dressing, applied some straw this time, and then regularly irrigated to get the grass established within a month. So that was all the work that we did. After about a month or so, or 3 weeks, we always revisit the site to do a weed assessment and grass assessment. We did have some weeds that popped up, but our hypothesis was that we were getting a good enough grass growth that eventually this grass is going to choke out those weeds. So we didn't do any other intervention. We just let the grass continue to grow. And on July 20th, 2023, so just a couple weeks later, a lot of those weed problems that popped up, they kind of disappeared because the grass was performing so well. So we didn't need any synthetic pesticides. We didn't need any synthetic fertilizers. And this strategy of the compost top dressing, the grass seed, the straw, and the irrigation worked very well for the schoolyard at Ray Elementary School. Now, this needs to be continual. It can't just be 1 year and then you miss the next year, especially for this schoolyard that, remember, gets a lot of traffic from softball, from an art fair. And once again, because it got all that traffic, it did return to mostly bare soil. And so we recommended that over the next 3 years, we need to continue this process of building the soil through compost top dressing, seeding, and irrigating the newly planted grass. That's what we did this year on June 7th, 2024. Once again, the grass returned to that dense, deeply rooted turf grass system. We kind of overseed a couple of those bare soil areas. So now it's more dense than it was in that image that you see on July 1st of 2024. Here's just the results from these interventions that we have done, that compost top dressing, that overseeding, and the straw. Anytime you see green in the table, that means there is a significant increase. So there was an increase in organic matter content from 2022 to 2024 of 3.2%, of phosphorus from 27 to 76, and potassium 203 to 635. So we're very happy with those soil health improvements based on our interventions for Ray Elementary. And then the costs, they are, they're pretty cost competitive, I would say, to conventional lawn care if you're just focusing on this compost top dressing, the seeding, and the straw. The compost, that means the handling, the hauling, the compost, and the actual application, that costs us about $1,600. The grass seed costs us around $250. The straw covering about $180, and then irrigation is around $1,000 to get the grass established. So around $3,000 we're looking at for the costs in the Chicago area. All right. Last case study, and then we'll get to questions and everything like that, is La Escuela Fraternity out in Milwaukee, one of our partner projects with Reflo. As Justin mentioned, they are transitioning asphalt to green space, so that brings different characteristics compared to Ray Elementary School, which has been a green space for pretty much its entire life. So for the asphalt to green space, we don't have as deep of a soil profile here. And you can already see that from this soil core taken from La Escuela Fraternity. This was a soil core taken in 2022 and very light gray color that you see right there. That's very organic matter deficient, except on that very top layer. And Justin has all the exact numbers, but they had brought, I believe, 6 inches of topsoil, and then they put grass sod over that topsoil. Unfortunately, the weather, it was in the summer, so we had some weather conditions where the grass really didn't root properly in that topsoil, so it just kind of formed a blanket over this topsoil, and it kind of burned through that organic matter percentage. That's why we see that kind of dark layer. That's pretty much just dead thatch that we have for La Escuela Fraternity. So it's a very different assessment for us because we're not going to be able to aerate this particular schoolyard. The light layer is like rock and gravel and some of that asphalt. So that would break an aerator. Instead, what we need to do is we need to build up from this layer using things like compost and even sometimes topsoil. So here's the soil compaction assessment. It's kind of expected, 300 PSI, almost across the board. We couldn't get very deep with that soil penetrometer. But, looking at the soil test results, they were actually better than Ray Elementary School. Higher phosphorus, higher potassium. Nitrogen was a little bit low, but that's not too concerned. Nitrogen fluctuates the most out of all these nutrients. The organic matter percentage, though, was very low, and we knew that we would have to increase the organic matter percentage for La Escuela Fraternity. So our intervention this time was not doing an aerator because that could potentially break the aerator and it might not be able to create a deeper soil profile. Instead, we resorted to an organic herbicide. The product was Prize Fighter. We applied it twice, 3 weeks apart to kill the vegetation. And then we had students from Reflo rake up the dead vegetation keep some of the grass behind, but a lot of the weeds were being raked up so that we had as bare soil as possible. And then we did the compost top dressing as well as the seeding. We had an irrigation company come by. And unfortunately, we once again had a very hot summer, and we had a weed pressure that was not expected, but we identified this pressure as purslane, which the one thing to know about purslane, it doesn't root very deeply. So that enables us to actually do a flail mower to disrupt this purslane, kind of remove it, and then do another replanting. So we had a company called Green Team of Wisconsin. They're now Green Wise Organic Lawn Care. Do a flail mower treatment on September, overseed, apply a new straw product called Easy Straw, irrigate, and within a month we had that grass system that we want, that kind of dense grass system. Now, this is another example of where we need to continue to build the soil through compost, overseeding, irrigation. It's not going to be overnight. We're going to do this once and this grass is going to be there forever. We need to continue to do that process that I laid out. But here are the improvements that we saw at La Escuela Fraternity. Organic matter went up by 2.5%. And you can see across the board for phosphorus, potassium, sulfate, calcium, all those went up as well after our interventions from 2022 to 2024. And the costs were actually less than in Chicago. I was actually surprised to see that. I thought Chicago was going to be cheaper, but the costs were a little bit less, still around that 3,000 range each year for La Escuela Fraternity. So I'm happy to answer any questions. Here's some more information about the Technical Assistance Program. Please do visit its webpage at bit.ly/MGG and caps, assistance and uncaps. We do a lot more in terms of quarterly meetings with our clients and community engagement support in terms of signage, press releases, and so on. Just the key takeaways: take a soil test every 3 years, maybe even once a year if it's a highly trafficked athletic field. Feed the soil with organic matter dense materials. Mow high, irrigate properly, use all these cultural practices that I just covered, and seek help if needed from programs such as Midwest Grows Green. We have a lot of free resources at lawnandland.org covering some of these concepts that I just discussed. And if you have any questions, my email is rcanders2@gmail.com. Thank you for having me, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thanks, Ryan. I'm just gonna do that launch one quiz question quick for people to answer. And people can just answer that while we do Q&A.
Looks like we do have one question. Hi, everyone. My name is Jasmine Digest, and I am the operations manager with Reflo. And it looks like Faith was wondering if you ever use Clover.
Yeah. We actually did try Clover at Ray Elementary School, and what it did not take. That was that first one in 2022. And it might be because we didn't have the proper irrigation. What we found for schoolyards, though, at this point is a fescue mix. It works best. And then if you want to get to clover, try to interseed that fescue mix with some micro clover, because clover, of course, is a legume. It recycles nitrogen, and we do want to get our schoolyards on that because that could reduce their management. It's just been, I think, with those compacted soil conditions, some of these clover mixes have had some trouble as compared to a tall fescue that is a little bit more adjusted to those compacted soil conditions.
Nikki, did you want to go over the results from the Q&A? I don't.
Yeah,
the-
so the right answer is healthy growing plants that outcompete pests for air, water, nutrients, and sunlight. To what provides the best defense against weeds in schoolyards? Oh, we have another question.
So, Ryan, is there a standard recommendation for a fescue mix?
For a fescue mix, so we use Good Nature's because we've had success with it. It's called the Tough Turf mix, but a lot of different mixes will work well. We actually did an assessment, and it might be a little bit outdated, on lawnandland.org of some of the fescue mixes and how they perform through the NTEP analysis. That's the National Turfgrass Evaluation Program. So we looked at some of the factors that they scored, and in terms of wear and drought and things like that. And we listed kind of like the top 10 or so varieties. So that could be something to look at as well, to see if you can find some of those varieties, because they performed pretty high based on some of the data that we pulled. But that could also be a little bit outdated. I think that assessment was done in 2018.
Okay, one more question. If you're working with a contractor of compost and organic fertilizers, and you only have time or capacity to concern yourself with a couple of characteristics, what should you focus on?
In terms of the compost, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I think what we have found is you really kind of the fineness of the product. So the most difficult part for compost that we have found is the hauling and the actual application. If it's a really clunky material, and it's raining or something like that, that could be very hard to transport it and then apply it. So you want as fine of a product as possible for compost. And so that would be my recommendation for us in the Chicago area. We got good product from the Mulch Center and DK Organics. And then in the Milwaukee area, we got Blue Ribbon Compost. And then a lot of the compost will provide you with some like soil tests or assessments with information about nutrient content and things like that. That's also good to look through if they're able to provide that information through like standards that they've gone through.
All right. Does anyone else have other questions? Looks like we're at 5 o'clock. So thank you everyone for joining us today. Thank you to our presenters.
Thank you. Ryan, that was tremendous. Thank you so much. And it was so helpful that the interventions that you did in Milwaukee was huge. So thank you for all of your hard work.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's really important for us to share this because I think it can be applied to any schoolyard. You just saw the costs of $3,000 per year. I know, budgets aren't that high, but $3,000 I think is pretty reasonable.
Yeah.
For people to get.
Thanks so much.
All right. Thank you.
Okay.
Bye.
Thanks. Bye.